off with a quick 1 or 2 slide introduction to Discover. And I know last week Rui gave a great session, 45 minutes solid content of what Discover is. So I'm definitely not going to go to anywhere near as deep as he did. But this is just a quick recap for anyone who couldn't make that session. After that, we're going to talk about the different implementation options you have when working with Sitecore Discover. And then we're going to start to drill down into the SDK itself and figure out what's actually included in the box. We're going to go through the eventing model, showing how you can post data from your application into Discover. And then we're going to touch on the component model, which is showing how you can use that data you've populated Discover back out to populate your your commerce experiences on your site. So let's get started. If you go to the developer portal today, this is how it describes Sitecore Discover. Basically, it's a product discovery optimization engine, and it's all powered by AI on the back end. The idea being that you're basically displaying the right products to the right users and always at the right time. And it works across channel. So whether that's mobile, web, email, in-store, the aim is to basically maximize the product displays you're showing to help drive revenue, basically, and help conversion. So how does it do that? Well, there's a huge feature set that's part of Discover. But as I said, basically, it boils down to really fine-grained control over product visibility. So you get that through the use of widgets and then the ability to do A/B testing and multivariant testing based on those widgets and pages that you build. The aim being that you're basically boosting the products that are going to help drive sales, and you're burying the products which aren't going to help drive sales. That's the end of the day what this product's there for. So when you come to actually implement Discover, there's a few different options that you have. The first is hosted pages. With this approach, you provision a reverse proxy for some of your application routes, or maybe even a complete subdomain some of our customers do. And that's pointed to Discover's servers themselves, and those pages are actually entirely served by Discover. The first thing I want to call out here is that you'll see that this appears quite low on the developer effort axis, the vertical axis. And that's because once you provision this reverse proxy or the subdomain, the developer's no longer required to basically configure all these different pages. All that can be done by the merchandiser within the admin interface of Discover, which is called the Customer Engagement Console, or the CEC. You'll see, though, that basically it's not all the way along the horizontal axis either. The feature availability isn't completely available if you choose this methodology. So ease of implementation, but it does come at the cost of some feature availability. The next option you have is kind of the complete opposite of this, and this is a direct API integration. So Sitecore Discover is an API-first platform, so all the functionality is available via API integration. Now, with this type of integration, obviously the development team has to be heavily involved in crafting out these Discover-based experiences. However, the result you get from that is complete feature set availability. So you can see on one end, less development effort, but less features. On the other end, you've got more development effort, more features. Luckily, there is a middle ground, though. And screen moved on too quickly. Where did that go? Okay. Yes, luckily there is a middle ground, though. And that's what we're here to talk about today. That's the new JavaScript SDK for Discover that's being developed and is currently in beta. So what this does is it basically, similarly as with the API-first approach, it gives you access to the full feature set that Discover has available. However, the SDK does quite a lot of the heavy lifting for you from the development side. So the effort required to integrate Discover is reduced by quite a bit. So let's start looking into the SDK and what's included with it. And as I just called out, this is still being worked on. It's still currently in beta. It's a React library. So if you're building with React or a framework based on React like NextJS, then this is definitely going to be the way to go. If you're building with another JavaScript library, maybe you're on Angular or Svelte or something else, or maybe a different language completely, maybe you're in .NET or Go or any other language you're working with. If that's the case, you're going to have to pick through the other two options that we just discussed. So what this SDK does, though, is it gives you complete control over how you can design your commerce experiences. So as I'll show shortly, you can decide how much responsibility lies with the developers compared to the merchandisers for each component, and you can kind of dial back between the two different scenarios. It comes with two main elements as well, and these are basically contained within the two NPM packages. You have the React NPM package, which is the main SDK framework. And then you have the ability to search widgets, which comes through the UI NPM package. So before I go into the demo and show all this in action, I just want to talk a little bit about the scenario we're going to walk through today. Now, obviously, you can take this SDK and you can integrate it in a brand new greenfield project. But what I wanted to show is how simple it is to implement across an existing live e-commerce site. So we're going to be looking at NextJS Commerce tonight with Order Cloud on the back end, providing the existing commerce functionality. And I quite like this example because NextJS Commerce is an open source library. You can get started with that today. And with Order Cloud, there's trial accounts available. So you can go and set up NextJS Commerce with Order Cloud today. It only takes about 10 minutes. It's really quick to get up and running. Another thing I like about this is it gives us a really nice example of the benefits you can get when you combine static site generation, that which you get with Next.js, and the dynamic rendering functionality that you get with Discover. So how does this look from kind of a high-level architecture proposal? Well, when you do a build with Vercel, what it does is it pulls in your code from GitHub, and it pulls in your commerce data from Order Cloud. And it combines those two together in the build process and produces a bunch of static assets, which it publishes to the Vercel CDN. What happens then is your end users come along and they browse to your site, and these static assets are returned blazingly fast from the CDN because it's edge computing, so it's all really close to the users wherever they are, and all of the compilations happened at build time. All the assets are static, so the speed of the site is really fast. And this is basically what static site generation is. This is what Next.js and Vercel are fantastic at. When it comes to commerce scenarios, there are some other interactions that happen. And you can think of things like when you're browsing the storefront and then you add something to your cart, for example, or you go through the checkout process. You're not dealing with static assets at this point. At this point, you need to interact with the commerce engine itself, which is Order Cloud. So then the browser is going to make calls into that commerce engine. There may be middleware involved here. Sometimes you'll middleman that through maybe a .NET Web Service or through Vercel's middleware or something like that. But for all intents and purposes, it's the browser directly or indirectly calling back to the commerce platform. And this, what you're looking at here, is Next.js Commerce in a nutshell, basically. Well, then we're going to be adding Discover on top of it. So Discover is going to come and sit alongside, and it's going to provide all this dynamic functionality. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be sending event data from our browser, telling the Discover how our users are interacting with our site, how they're interacting with the products on our site, what they're viewing, what they're adding to their cart, things like this. We're then going to use that data to create personalized catalog experiences, which are then going to be returned in the form of widgets back to the browser and then dynamically loaded into the page. This is the architecture as a whole. But today we're basically going to be focusing on this piece here. How do we get event data out of the browser into Discover? And how do we use that data to then create these catalog experiences? So let's talk about events first. When you're implementing Discover into a new site, this is probably the first thing you're going to want to do, because this is going to allow you to start harvesting data about how users are currently interacting with your site before you start to add the componentry to it. And what that means is that if you later decide to, for example, add a most popular products widget to your page, if you've already been collecting your data for X amount of time beforehand, it means as soon as you put that component live, it's going to be working real data because the data is already there in the background ready to power it. Now, these events are built into the SDK. Some of them are wired up for you. Some of them you have to trigger yourselves from within your React application. If you look at the table here, this is available on our documentation site. This is all public. You can see the top set of, I think it's 6 rows-ish, give or take, where the end column says yes by JS SDK for React. And those are all automatically implemented for you. So as soon as you integrate the SDK, those events are going to get tracked automatically. The bottom ones, where it says no dispatch verbosely, these are the ones you're going to have to wire up yourselves. Each application is slightly different, so you're going to have to basically wire that up with how your application has been created. When it comes to the componentry side, we have 3 different ways to add a component to a page, and we're going to look at all 3 in action today. You have the concepts of kind of like static components, which are basically created in the CEC and then dropped into a page by the developer. And it is by a developer because they're going to take a specific widget out of the CEC and drop it into a specific place in the DOM. And it'll always be that widget, always in that location. An alternative to that is dynamic components. And this is where the developer uses a widget tag To me, I kind of like thinking like this, kind of like a placeholder in XM Cloud. And what happens then is merchandisers in the CEC could basically dynamically insert widgets into that location in the DOM. So they can add widgets, they can take them away. And this is kind of what I was talking about before, where you're dialing control between the developer, being explicit where the widgets exist, or back towards the marketer or merchandiser, sorry, just providing placeholder style areas that they can drop code in. The third type is a global component, and these appear on every page. A great example of this is if you think of a standard e-commerce site, you'd have a search bar in the header. That's going to be on pretty much every page of the site. It's not going to be different on any of the pages. So that's what we classify as a global component. One more thing we're going to take a look at this is our storybook documentation. This is a fantastic resource showing you all the different widgets that are available and how you can create them. It includes code samples showing how you can create the components themselves, but also then how you can combine these components into templates, which provide larger pieces of functionality. For example, a rich preview search, which we'll see shortly. But you don't have to use Storybook. We also have a CLI available, which is there to help with these component creation via the SDK, and we'll see that as well. Okay, so I think that's probably enough slides for now. Let's dive over and see some of this in action. Right, I think what we'll do first is I'm going to load up VS Code here. And this is the solution we're working with today. It's NextJS Commerce, as I said. And with NextJS Commerce, all of the functionality exists within this site folder in here. I'm already in here in my terminal, and it uses the pnpm package manager. So I'm going to run pnpm dev, get our terminal out of the way now, and that's going to bring me up a developer instance running locally of the site. Now we can go to the localhost 3000, and this is going to show me an instance of NextJS Commerce. I have made a couple of changes to this ahead of time. If you go and stand up NextJS Commerce with Order Cloud, you do get a sample catalog with it out of the box, but there's only like 4 products. There's not many. Luckily, the demo team here have lent me their Discover instance to be able to work with, and they have a much bigger catalog. I think there's like 90 odd products in there. So I've just switched the catalogs over to align with that. So alongside components I've created in advance, which we'll see shortly, that they're the only changes that I've made ahead. So we have our NextJS Commerce site here. This is all super fast, all statically generated, pretty standard B2C shopping site. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go and implement some events on there. So let's go back to the application. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to load up my _app TypeScript file. And this is basically the wrapper for the application as a whole. This gets executed for every route that gets rendered in this application. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap the entire app in a widgets provider. And this is the first entry point for the SDK. I'm going to pull in some references here. And you'll notice here, this is coming from the Sitecore Discover React library. Remember, we said that's the main library which handles most of the base level functionality for this SDK. And there we go. It's as simple as that. I can save this. And now I can go back to my browser. And we'll bring up the dev tools. A little bigger. Okay, so if we go to network, I'm going to refresh the page. And I'm refining by XHR requests, so dynamic requests from here. And where did my site go? I think it's refreshed it again. And what we can see here is we have requests now going over to RFK SRV. There's a hangover from Reflection, who was the acquired company previously. This is where the SDK basically sends its API request to. So if we look at this #1 request here, we can see we automatically have our first events wired up. All I've had to do is include that widgets provider. And we're automatically sending it over a view event, and it's of the type page. So this is a page view event. Go through, we can see exactly what is included in here. We can go and inspect the object. We can see, it's loading just / the home page. But the thing which is really interesting to us is this UUID, because this is my unique identifier as a customer on the site. This is basically stored in a cookie, and it's how Discover will identify me each time I return. But we could do some interesting things with that. So I'm going to go and load up the CEC now. And what we can do while we're in here is we can actually start to inspect what that specific user is doing on the site at any one time. So I'm connected to my correct Play Summit instance. I'm going to go to Dev Resources, and I'm going to go to the Events Monitor. And if we basically go and paste my UUID in here, I can click Start Monitoring. And this is now going to basically kind of keep an eye on everything that user does on the site. I can go back to my home page. I'll refresh it again. Again, we'll see the same requests come through. And we can see here, it's made the same page view event request back to Discover. If I go back to Discover now, back to the CEC, in the event monitor, we can see the events shown in here. The page view one's pretty basic. We don't get too much data in here, but we can see, the data. This person came and viewed this page. There's my UUID again, and the URI of the page that I viewed. So you can see, really, really simple to start collecting those automatic events straight away. But what about the events we have to wire up ourselves? Well, one of those was the product detail page view. So let's take a look at that. What we're going to do is we're going to go into our product page. This slug page here is the page that's used for all of our product view activity. So what we're going to do for this is down in here, where is my, yes. So in here, we're going to load in the use effect hook, that's of React. And then we're going to call a method again out of the React SDK library, which is track PDP view events. We pass in the ID of the product, which is the SKU for the product being viewed. This is easy as that. We can save this page. We can now go back to the browser again. And let's go and view this lovely pair of golf clubs here. I'm not a golfer, but I assume they're great. So with this running in development mode, it's going to be a little slower to run locally because it doesn't statically generate all the pages. It actually generates them at request time. Well, here we go. We can see we have another request under this number 1 here. And now we can see we have a different type. You can see we still have a view type, but now the name is PDP, so product detail page. We can go and we can expand this out again, and we can see all the data that we passed in. That's the SKU for the product. You can see it matches the SKU in the header there in the URL. Again, we can go back to the CEC, and we have another event in here. We can see my user viewed a product. We can go and expand our event details, and again, we get all the data here. So you get this really nice debugging experience, allowing you to dig into what your users are doing on the site. Let's keep going. One of the other ones was adding product to the cart. We had to add that in ourselves as well. So for that one, we have to go and edit one of the components themselves. We're going to go into components, product sidebar. Here we go. This was slightly different. So we don't want to run this every time this component is loaded. We actually only want to run this when the function is called that adds the product to the cart itself. So first of all, we're going to add in a reference to use router. Does that give me a red line? Okay, I'm not sure about that. Basically, this gives me a reference into the next router because we're going to need access to the current path I'm on. After we have that, we can then basically, here's the function where we add our product to our card itself. This is where it's going to physically do the e-commerce action. So we can just hook in after that. Once it's been successfully added to the cart, we add some references in again. Here, this time we need to build an event model for a product event model. We're once more going to pass in the SKU of the product we're working with. We're going to set the quantity. We're just going to hard code it to 1 for this instance. But you could, for example, dynamically set that from a drop down or something. And then the current price of the product when we added it. We then call this track add to cart event. We pass in the event model and we pass in the path too. And there's a reason for that. A lot of commerce sites will allow you to add products from different locations on the site. You may be able to add them from the product detail page, but you may also be able to add them directly from the product listing page. Some of them have a quick add button. So the reason we have the path here is so you can distinguish where on your site customers are actually adding products to the cart from. It can help you make UI decisions down the track. So let's save that and go back to our browser again and we'll refresh. Okay, so next up, we're going to add to cart. So we can see the cart request is the actual cart request going over to do physically set it up in Order Cloud. But then we get our request over to reflection servers. So now we get a new type. This isn't a view type. This is an A2C type, add to cart. So here we're going to take a look at the object again, and we can see all the values that I set in there. The price is $299. We set 1 for the quantity, and again, we have that same SKU. So if we go back to the CEC, once more, we can see we get our add to cart events. So if we go and take a look in here, We can see the details of the event, all those values staying there. You may notice there's 2 add to cart records here, which confused me a little bit at first. So I asked the product team about this. And what happens with some events is they're added to a queue to be processed on the back end. So you can see this one says it's generated by the customer. And that basically represents the action of the add to cart event being added to the event queue in the back end of Discover. We then have another which is generated by Sitecore. This represents the event being picked off the queue and actually processed. So you may see 2 entries to some events in here, but it'll only ever be represented as a single event in your analytics. So that's key to call out. Okay, so at this point, we would obviously go through and wire up all the other events, but I think you've kind of got the hang of it by now. So I'd be happy to deploy this out now. I'd push my site live and I'd just start harvesting all this data, because that's going to tell me what all my users are doing on my site. And what we're going to look at next is componentry. And it means that when we start to add these components in, we're going to have a wealth of data already being harvested on our users that can be used to power these experiences. Okay, so components. Now, before I dig into this too much, lay this down for now. The next thing I want to show you is Storybook, which I mentioned before. Saved in here. Okay, let's go back to the start of it. For those of you who haven't used Storybook before, it's an awesome way to document SDKs like this. So you get really deep levels of information and examples as well. So you can see we have all the information about how to install and get set up with the SDK itself. It goes into all the different hooks that are available. You can see the widget provider we just saw. So here you can see, where do you import it from? How do you add it to your actual application? The different ways you can add it. We did it with a customer key and an API key. You can also do it with a host example as well. All the properties that are available on it. Yeah, so again, we're going to focus on the widgets now, and that's kind of what I want to hop over to next. And it starts to explain what widgets are available here. So you can see we have content personalization widgets, and we have merchandising widgets. So we have SEO, we have banner, and we have HTML blocks. So I should probably make this a little bigger. And we have HTML blocks for the content personalization types. And for merchandising types, we have recommendations, we have search results, and we have preview search. The one I want to call out, which we're going to look at shortly, is the generic widget. This is the one that kind of functions a little bit like a placeholder and allows you to insert any widgets you want inside of it. And there's also a key sentence here at the top, which is this bit here. So it says the SDK knows beforehand how to render HTML blocks, banner, and SEO widgets. However, it doesn't know how to render recommendation, search results, and preview search widgets. That's because HTML blocks, banner, and SEO, they're just static HTML. That's all they are. The HTML is controlled from within the CEC, and we'll see that shortly. With recommendations, search results, and preview widgets, it's not like that. Your HTML and your markup is controlled within the application itself. So you need to tell the SDK which components to use to render that type of widget. If you don't, it won't render the component. Okay, so before we implement them, let's go over to the CEC again and let's take a look at some widgets. If we go to the widgets section here, as I said before, the demo team have been kind enough to lend me their Discover instance for this. So most of these are based on their demo team instances. But you'll see some with the REA prefix, and they're the ones we're going to be working with today. We have 2. We have the homepage banner and the recommended products. You can also see the RFK ID for these, the identifiers, and you'll see why that's important shortly. So let's take a look at the homepage banner first. This is an example of one of those HTML widgets I just talked about. We can go into the settings here, and we get an example of what it's going to look like. We can go into here, and we go to edit here. You can see we have basically a banner with a big image and 2 little images next to it. And then we have a series of properties. So where's the image going to link off to, the href? And what image URL are we going to use? This is going to pull images out of our DAM. There's a whole heap of different HTML templates you can use up. So if I go to choose another, you can see like these all come out of the box with Discover. There's heaps of different sample banners and templates and heroes you can choose from. And you can also completely create your own from scratch. So fully customizable here. We're not going to change anything today. Everything's been set up for us. So I do just want to hop over to the recommended products widget next and take a look at that one. So we'll go into the widget settings. What we're using here, this is slightly different. This is a recommended product widget, as I said. So this is going to display data of products that are in Discover. And that's controlled via a recipe. So if I go into edit here, what I've done is basically chosen a recipe, which is just going to randomly display me a selection of products out of Discover. But there's a whole heap of different logics or recipes you could choose from here. Things, top ordered products. You could have most abandoned cart products. This list goes on. You can see how small my scroll bar is here. There's heaps and heaps of different recipes in here. Again, you can create your own. You can query the AI on the back end how you like. I just kept it really simple and just displayed a random set of products for now. So we have our two widgets. How do we control where they go on the page though? Well, you do this in pages. So once more, we have a page we're going to be working with today with the REA prefix, which is going to be the home page. That's where we're going to be doing our work today. If we click on this page, and I'm going to go into the default variation. I'm not going to touch too much on variations today. This is how you would do A/B and multivariate testing. You would create different variations, use rules to display different variations to different users. We're not going to go into personalization today. We're just going to go into the basics of how we configure a page. So we load up this page here, and we can see we've added our two widgets to it. And you can see we're getting real imagery here. This is how it's going to be displayed on the page. And then we get our products below in a little bit of a carousel style thing. Okay, so we've got the CEC all set up and configured now. I think the next step is going to be to actually integrate it. Let's hop back to our solution. Yeah. Okay, so we can close these off now. The first thing I need to do, remember I said we're going to have to tell Discover, or the SDK, how to render recommendation widgets. It doesn't know how to do that out of the box. So to do that, we're going to go back to our app page here because we need this to be available for every page in our site. And we're going to use a different hook that's provided by the SDK, which is called the setWidgetType hook. Again, we'll pull in some references here. And what we're saying here is basically that if I tell the SDK to render a recommendation widget, but I don't tell it which specific component in my application to use, fall back and use this generic recommendation component. What is that? If I go look at my components here, we have a Discover folder. These are a bunch of components we're going to be working with today that I've created ahead of time. The generic recommendation widget is the fallback one we're going to use. So if we look in here, it's pretty simple. We basically have a call through to get the recommended products from the CEC. So that makes a call through to the API for us. Once we have those products, we iterate through and we render out this product card, which basically renders out a bunch of HTML for each of the products. Super simple. Okay, so let's actually add some widgets to a page. And as I said, we're going to be working with our homepage, our index page. So let's go back to there now. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the use effect hook in here. My home. Paste this in, get this nicely formatted. Okay. As always, we need to pull in our references. Then we'll talk through what's happening. So we're using the use effect hook. And inside there, we're going to set up the page controller from the SDK. And we're going to set up our context, the context that this route is operating in. And we're basically telling it to go and load all the widgets from the REA home item. That was the name of the page we defined in the CEC. Once we do that, we can then call the use page widgets function, part of the SDK, sorry. And that's going to return us a series of properties. We're going to get an isLoading property, which is basically set to true while the request's in action, which allows you to use that to basically display loading messages or spinners and things like this. And then we get the widget data itself coming back. So how can we start to use this? Well, first way I'm going to start to use it is in the placeholder style manner. Let's go and take a look at the app again first. If we go back and hop over to the home page, don't need the dev tools now, they can go away. So we have this home page here. We have a widget that looks very similar to this actually in the CEC and looks very similar to this as well. Well, this is above the fold here. This is going to be statically generated in Vercel when I deploy it. So I want this part of the site to be like blazingly fast. If I scroll further down, I have another HTML panel type area here, another set of products rendered out here. This is below the fold. So if I'm going to load dynamic content, that's probably the best place to do it because users aren't going to be waiting to see that. So I think this is going to be a good set of components to replace with data and componentry from Discover. So let's do that. So we're going to hop down here, my index page. So we're going to leave the first grid we set, didn't we? And we're going to leave the first marquee. I don't want to change those. And we have that hero component. Don't want to change that. Aha, here we go. Our grid component here. Let's comment that out. And what we'll do instead, I'm going to paste this HTML in and format it, put the references. And okay, what are we doing here? We're going to load a div in. In there, we're going to have two code blocks. The first one is reading that is loading flag that was returned from the use widgets call earlier on. And it says, while I'm loading, render a div that says loading. Super simple. Again, this is where you could put a spinner graphic in there or something a bit more interactive. This will do for the example today. Then we get down to the second line. So when loading is complete, this will be hidden because that'll be false, and then this will display. And what we're going to do is we're going to say for each of our widgets that have been returned out of the API, map them into this widget here. This is the dynamic widget container I talked about, kind of like a placeholder. So what this is going to do is it knows how to render the HTML for the panel control because that's pure HTML stored in the CC. This, excuse me, this is a recommendation widget that we're rendering second. And we've told it to, if we're using a generic control, fall back to use that generic recommendation component. So that's what it's going to do. We can save this, go back to my site. I'll scroll to the top and refresh. These are above the fold, so we're not going to see any changes here. Can I see that? You see the loading? Very quick there. Here now we have our panel coming down with our imagery in there. And we have our generic recommendation widget displayed below. So now, as a merchandiser in the CEC, I could go in there, I could take that widget out, I could replace it with something completely different. I have complete control over this section of the DOM now. I can change this how I like. But I talked before about having like static componentry as well, having the developer take control of components and insert them at different places. If we look at this here, I don't really like this. I've got two product listings, one after another. That doesn't look fantastic. This one's static. It's not moving at all. Really, like my monitor is pretty big. I think this cut marquee here probably would be below the fold for most users. So I'm going to replace this marquee here with this component here, rendered as a marquee as well. So let's do that. I'm going to hop back to my index page. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go up to my first marquee. We will comment that out. Paste in this marquee recommendation component instead. This is another component created in advance. So here you can see we have our marquee recommendation. Very similar to the generic recommendation. We make a request for our data from the API. We render our products in this product card, but it's inside a marquee tag. That's what's going to give us that nice scrolling effect. So I'll go back to index. The one thing I want to call out as well before I show the site is here's where we're tying it through to that component. So you can see here, we're passing in a specific RFK ID. You remember from when we were in the CEC before, RFK ID 92 was the recommendation widget that was created for us in there. Let's save that, go back to the site, we'll scroll up, I'll hit refresh, and then hopefully we should see a loading message here. There we go. And there we go. We can see our products are now loading in. It's a recommendation widget again, but now we've explicitly told it to use a different component type in the application. Cool thing I like about this as well is if we go down here, you'll notice that that recommendation widget in the generic format is no longer rendered here. We haven't changed that at all. We didn't tell it not to render that. The SDK is smart enough to know that I've already rendered this widget up here, so don't render it for a second time down here. I only want it to appear once on my page. Okay, so that's pretty cool. That kind of covers dynamic components and static components. So we had a third type we were going to look at, which was going to be, what were they called? It was global widgets, that was it. Global widgets. Prime example of this, preview search. This search box here, it works. It's not all that exciting. We could do a lot better with it. So before I do that, I'm going to hop back to Storybook, and I'm going to talk a little bit about templates. So if we scroll down here, I mentioned before that we have templates here which show how you can group different smaller UI components into larger pieces of functionality. And preview search is a great example of this. And this is a good example of why I really like Storybook. We're going to be implementing this left menu preview search today. We can go into here, into the demo, and we can actually see it in action. So I can go into here and search for trousers, I think. This is a clothing store, the catalog on the back end here. But you get an example of how this component is going to work. From here, we can go up to the template section. And what we're working with here is basically we're going to be doing the preview search left styled. When you get the styled ones, they're based on a JS library called styled components that allow you to provide both the HTML and componentry in one file, which is the index.js, sorry. And then on here, we'll see shortly. And then you provide the CSS here in this style.js. Now, obviously, the style.js isn't going to 100% match your target styling for your site. It's probably going to get you like 70% of the way there, which is probably good enough for you to hand off and to someone who can finish the styling. Or maybe you're just trying to POC some functionality. It makes it really quick to get things up and running. So let's see that in action. I'm going to hop back to VS Code again. Yeah. So we need to implement our preview search. If I go and look in my components up here, we have preview search styled. I can get rid of these now. And all I've done is copy the JavaScript for the functionality into here and the JavaScript for the styling. The only change I've made is to wire up the keywords coming in. So basically, it doesn't know how to get those from the query string. That's the only change I've had to make for this. So let's implement it. I'm going to go to my components again. I think it's in common, navbar. Here we go. And what I'm going to do is this search bar is the default one. I'm going to replace both the web and mobile version. We will drop in our reference once more. We can save that. We go back to the site now. The eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that this search magnifying glass hopped over to the other side because thanks to hot reload, straight away it's worked. That's all we have to do. We now have this functionality baked into the site. So I can go and search for golf and it'll give me golf things. I can delete that. I can go and search for cycling and it'll give me cycling things. It makes suggestions, you know, was I maybe looking for a cycling bottle? Maybe that's what I was interested in. You can see though that it's really easy to integrate, and we're starting to get these really rich interactive UI experiences provided really, really simply. So we can do that search, and that's going to take us off to our search results page now. This is the default out-of-the-box search results page for NextJS Commerce. It's okay, it's not fantastic. The other thing is it's all hard baked into the app. The merchandiser has no control here. So what we could do is we can give control of this back over to the merchandiser by implementing this entire search results component again via a widget. This is one of the templates. Again, down here, we can see we have search results templates in here. I think it was the basic one we did. Yeah, this is the basic one we're going to be rendering out here. We can go and view our templates. Search results basic styled. You can see we get the functionality in the index.js. We get the styling in the style.js. I go back to VS Code. We're going to take a look in our Discover components folder, and we can see again, I've just copy and pasted those assets into my application here. So let's make use of them. I'm going to go to my search page now. Search page implementation out of the box here is pretty simple, so we're going to have to add a little bit more code. I'm going to create an actual search export here. We don't need that reference anymore. Oh, don't forget to add the layout in. We need that for sure. Let's pull in the reference to component I just looked at. We need to reference the layout to be used. We can save that page. And if I go back, wait a second or two, you can see it's reloaded in the background. And there we go. We now have a search results page powered by Discover. So this is basically using the keyword cycling, which I searched for. You can see we have all of our cycling products. We have our faceting on the left. We have our counts up here. You can see we have sorting, we have pagination down here on the right, and we have the number of results per page. The key thing now is the merchandiser can go into the CEC and they can change facets. Maybe I don't want you to facet on final price, so I can hide that entire facet group. Maybe I don't want you to be able to search by featured, for example. I can remove those search options. I can change the results per page defaults. I can change how pagination works. It allows me to basically cede control back into the hands of the merchandiser. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show you was the CLI, which is also pretty cool. So if I go look in the root of my application here, somewhere we have, yes, we have this SC Discover settings JSON. And what we're doing here is we're basically defining where the CLI should create its components. So I'm creating mine in this components Discover folder, yes, in here. And what we can do now is we can do npx, if I can type properly, SC Discover new widget. And this is going to take us to an interactive prompt to help us basically create widgets, which exactly the same widgets we just saw through Storybook. It's another way to create them. The nice thing here is I can create TypeScript. You'll notice it was just JavaScript before. We're going to add TypeScript to Storybook. We don't have it yet, but you can do TypeScript this way today. Let's do that. What should we do? Preview search. Let's create a different type of recommendation. Let's create a recommendation carousel. Beautiful. Okay, you can see it's found my SC Discover settings JSON. It's just a confirmation now. Is that the correct location? Is that where I want to store my widgets? It is. Okay, next I've got to give it a name. Recommendation carousel. Yeah. Oh, it's already been created. Oh, sorry, there's an empty folder there from when I tried this before. Let me just go through that one more time. Okay, so we're going to do TypeScript. We're going to do recommendation carousel. That's the correct location. Now we get to test my typing again. Recommendation carousel. That's better. There we go. So now it's created my folder and it's created my index.tsx. I've realized I wanted to do the styled one, really. That's the incorrect one. Luckily, what we can do is we can just run it again and we can give it a different name. So I can go into my new widget interactive flow, TypeScript. Where is the carousel style? That's a better way for us to go. That's the correct location. Recommendation carousel style. That'll do. Yep. Okay. So now you can see we get our TypeScript file, which includes, let's get the terminal out of the way. That includes, the styled includes all of the CSS to get us most of the way there for our styling. And then we get our index.tsx, which contains all of the functionality itself. Let's give this a go. Let me copy that name. What we'll do is, remember we set up that marquee recommendation on the homepage. Let's change it to use this carousel. Probably not going to fit the layout very well, but all you have to do is change the type. We're still going to render that same recommendation widget from the CEC, but we're going to render it in a carousel style. Go back into here. I'll start my local development server again. Now we'll hop back into the browser. Go back to the home page. Might take a little bit longer this time just because we're starting up that dev server. And then hopefully we should see that second widget below the big HTML panel should be rendered in the style of a carousel now instead. So you can see we have, where did that go? Oh, it's almost there. Here we go. We can see we have these items and we can start clicking through. There we go. We can go forwards a little bit. We can go backwards. I think I probably need to add some more products in it maybe to make it work a little better. But you get the idea. You can use the CLI. You can easily create these components and really quickly integrate them into your site. Okay. So I think it's probably time for me to hop back to slides now just to finish off, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay, so conclusion. Really, you can kind of do as much or as little with Discover as suits your use case. We have customers who have handed over every single piece of product display to Discover. Regardless what product's being displayed and where it's displayed, it's all driven by the Discover API. We have customers at the other end as well, though. They are basically really targeted with Discover, just key widgets here, there, and here and there. Basically, really, as I say, targeted with their use. And you can go anywhere between those two. It really depends on your use case. Another key thing here, which I really like, is it's just as easy to implement Discover on an existing e-commerce site. I showed Order Cloud today, but it doesn't have to be. It could be Shopify, it could be Salesforce Commerce Cloud, it could be any of the e-com platforms out there today. Because it operates directly from the front-end application and it's all API driven, you can put it over the top of any platform just as easily as you can implement it in a greenfield solution. You can get access to the JS SDK today. It is still in beta. When you start a Discover project, you'll be assigned a Discover expert to help you along the way. If you ask them about the SDK, they can give you information about how to get started with it. And if you do choose that route, and if you're building a React-based app, we really hope you do, then there's heaps of things that are going to help you along the way. Storybook and the CLI, they've been fantastic for me learning this. They make it really, really simple to get started. Okay, and with that, thank you for listening. I think we've got about 10 minutes left, so we can open it up and see if there's been any questions. I'm just going to have a drink while we look for these. Okay, so it looks like we have a question from Rinku. Where do we set up a data source for SDK, like Order Cloud or any other commerce data? So what I did ahead of time was I said I changed the catalog beforehand. So I have my catalog all synced into Order Cloud. And that's basically providing all of my e-commerce functionality. I also have my catalog synced into Discover, and that is how it knows what catalogs, what products to display. So when you're doing your data updates, so when you're doing a data update from your PIM or whatever it is, and your product catalog changes, you'd post that change into Order Cloud. You'd also post that change into Discover as well to make sure those systems are in lockstep and they have the same catalog data moving forward. And the next question was, if we need to customize existing widgets, then what should be the approach for it? Okay, so in the CEC, you can basically just go and customize any widgets you want. In there, as I showed, you can use all the different recipes if you're in a recommendation widget style to select how the products are selected that are going to be displayed. But if you want to change the markup, if that's what you're saying on the front end, like when I copied those template controls, for example, as template widgets into my application, after that, I have complete control over the markup. I said that'll get you 70% of the way there, give or take. You can then go and change that as much as you can. You can completely customize it. You can change where the data gets rendered and displayed. It's just a first-class component inside of your library there. Okay, so the next question from Kushant says, it seems like the JS SDK could be used with any search platform instead of just Discover, right? No, not really. So the SDK itself is built to interact with Discover. So the widget provider that I added in at the start in my app folder file, that basically also includes a set of environment variables that I had in there to identify my customer, my API key, things like this, that allow me to identify this application as being valid to access the CEC. It's all very much tied into the Discover API, so it wouldn't work with any other search platform now. Again from Kushant, for the analytics part, does the JS SDK widgets are not configured to capture every action automatically instead of adding events manually? So as I showed in that table at the start, I think it's roughly 50% of the event types are automatically configured. And these are really simple ones, to be honest with you. It's things like page views and things like that, which are basically automatically wired up through the React engine and the React reader. There's more complex ones you have to do yourself. For a detail page view, add to cart, which are the two I showed, And that's mostly because each commerce application is different. For both of those, you need to pass in the SKU, for example, for which product it is that's actually being added. All React commerce apps will work with different commerce backends. They'll have a different model in there for their actual product. So it'll be different ways of getting the SKU data. So that's a good example of why we can't automatically do that. And those events have to be manually wired up. Okay, we've got another question from Rinku. CDP also has event, and this also have different events. So if a customer is using both, then do we need to raise events for these two? So currently, yep, CDP and Discover are two separate products. So if you had both CDP and Discover together, you'd have two trackers, basically. They would be rendering events differently, and you'd use that functionality separately. We are looking at bringing our event tracking together across the product suite for Sitecore. It's not something we have together quite yet, but currently, yeah, you'd have two separate trackers and two separate events being fired. That's right.
Okay, so that means for now we can think that user has to raise two different events, but maybe down the line we can have one combined event which takes care of every Sitecore login, right?
That's the aim. That's the aim down the track. We're not sure when we're going to get there. Yeah, currently it's separate, but we are looking to unify the event tracking. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that will really help because if we if we have different component and if we again need to track different event for different components, it maybe like performance is also there and maybe they don't want that much, you know, and we have to track each and everything in a different way. That will really help.
I mean, that's fair. It depends on how you're tracking the events. Typically, event tracking shouldn't be a blocking request. It shouldn't affect the DOM that's rendered out because you're only posting activity event back. So it shouldn't affect user interaction too much. But I see what you're saying for sure. You're going to have to weigh up whether you want these multiple trackers and whether having the functionality that these products combined provide, whether it's worth having those multiple trackers for now, yeah.
Right, and maybe it can be a configurable thing. So if we have some config setting where we can provide those details, based on that, it can spread the event to different channels.
What was that? Sorry.
Like as you told that, yeah, we are working on this update, so maybe we can make it configurable through config or something like that, where we can trigger whether user want a different tracking for each or they want a combined tracking.
Exactly, yeah. So we're looking into how that's going to happen down the track. Again, it is still pretty early days for that, but I believe the idea is for a unified tracker, and then which products receive those events will just be handled on the back.